Good morning. I'm George Diggs, and a few years ago, the beautiful ruby-throated hummingbird got into trouble in parts of the Midwestern U.S. It evolved to feed on the nectar of flowers, especially red flowers. But it was also attracted to the bright red insulators used on the fences, the electric fences of ranches. They would put their beaks into these insulators, they would be electrocuted and killed. The same attraction that had gotten them food caused them to die. This is an example of a concept known as an evolutionary trap. That's an inherited behavior that had been advantageous, but in the modern world is so mismatched with the environment that it now causes serious problems. Another animal example is the Australian jewel beetle that lives in the western part of that country. The jewel beetle began to have problems for a very surprising reason. Beer bottles thrown from cars and trucks. These bottles were orange and had dimples like the female beetles. But the bottles were much bigger, shinier, and more dimpled. The male beetles were super stimulated by these really sexy beer bottles, and they would mate with them repeatedly, over and over and over, until they either dried out and died or were killed by ants. In the meantime, the female beetles were ignored. Now, both of these stories end well because the beer bottle company changed the design of the bottles, and the insulator color was changed to black or white or yellow. Now let's think about animals in the wild like zebras or lions and diet. Wild animals control their weight just like they do their blood pressure or their heart rate or their blood sugar. It's done automatically. They certainly don't count calories. They don't become obese even when food is abundant. Imagine you're a zookeeper. If you want to keep your animals healthy, like lions in captivity, one of the most important things for you to learn is to give them a diet as close as possible to what they would have eaten in the wild. In other words, a diet they evolved to eat. Now, I want us to do a thought experiment. What would happen if we fed carnivores, like lions, a diet of bread and cupcakes, or even brown rice and corn? Or if we fed animals that evolved as grazers, like zebras, a diet of steak and fries? Well, we've actually done essentially the same experiment with our pets. Dogs and cats evolved from wild carnivores. And when we put them on a diet in the modern world they didn't evolve to eat, that's based on grains and is very high in carbohydrates, the results are quite unfortunate. Many of them become obese, and many now suffer from the same health conditions plaguing people. Currently in the U.S., we have epidemics of a number of diet-related health problems. Where did we go wrong? Well, to answer this question, let's think about what was our natural diet. What diet did we evolve to eat? Our lineage evolved in the African savanna, and our species and those that preceded it ate a diet of unprocessed plants and animals. For more than 99% of the time, there have been human-like creatures on Earth. The details of the diet would have varied a great deal, depending exactly where on the planet a particular population ended up, whether still on the savanna or in the Amazon rainforest, the Tibetan Plateau, or the Arctic. But in all cases, it was some combination of unprocessed plants and animals. But in the modern world, our diet is mismatched with our genetics, with how we evolved. we're experiencing an evolutionary mismatch, and we are being trapped. We evolved to be attracted to certain flavors like sweet and salty and savory. But in the modern world, that attraction gets us into trouble because we're very susceptible to processed foods that overstimulate us. This is something called a supernormal stimulus. And processed food companies have gotten very good at creating foods that overstimulate us. In fact, they hire armies of flavor chemists and marketers to get us to buy and eat things that we shouldn't. Now, in fact, things that are irresistible. Think about donuts or cupcakes, soft drinks, all manner of junk and processed foods. What do you personally find almost irresistible, that almost calls your name? It's as if we act like baby sea turtles. Sea turtles evolved to get to the safety of the ocean as quickly as possible after they hatch at night on beaches. They have a strong built-in attraction for light, like the light of the moon and stars over the ocean. But just like we get trapped by junk foods, the baby sea turtles are super stimulated by the much brighter lights of our beachfront hotels and restaurants, and they go the wrong direction. And when they do, they don't survive. So how do we keep from being human examples of jewel beetles or baby sea turtles? Well, in the modern world, much of our food is unlike anything our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have encountered. But there are three things that make up a large percentage of the calories of many people today that are especially problematic and we should avoid. I call these the three modern dietary causes of disease. The first of these is sugar. We now know from the research that processed sugar contributes to diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and many other health problems. The second of these things are the industrial seed oils like corn oil and soybean oil, and the closer related trans fats that are made from them like margarine and shortening. Humans simply had never eaten these things until the early 1900s when industry figured out a way to extract them from seeds using high temperatures and toxic chemicals. And we now understand that trans fats, for example, are one of the worst possible things for a human to eat. 3, grains, especially gluten-containing grains. Gluten is toxic to many people, and it contributes to autoimmune disease, including celiac. Recent research shows that grains are particularly bad when they're turned into a dust, in other words, flour. Because in this form, when you eat them, the sugar of the grains goes into your bloodstream very rapidly. But perhaps even worse, emerging research is showing that flour disrupts the crucially important ecosystem of microbes in our digestive tracts. The final nail in the coffin of health in the U.S. really took off in the 1970s and 1980s, and that's the low-fat craze. And it's still believed by many people today, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Because of a combination of money and politics and bad science, the government and many health authorities started recommending a very low-fat diet. But let's think about what this really means. Food processors are great at removing the healthy natural fats from food. But fat is what gives food much of its flavor. And so to make the food palatable, they had to add in lots of sugar. Also, the food had to be highly processed, and inexpensive fillers were often added, grains and industrial seed oils, and so we end up with more of all three of our causes of disease. Now, some things should be obvious in this regard. For example, cake, big pieces of cake, cupcakes, cinnamon buns, high-sugar breakfast cereal. But let's think about a couple of things that many people feel are healthy. Low-fat yogurt. There's actually so much added sugar that it's almost having a soft drink. Or low-fat granola bars. The first three ingredients, grains, sugar, and seed oils. Let's think back to our zookeeper. What would she say about how we, human zoo animals, in the modern world are doing? How are we doing on the standard American diet and following the health advice given to us by many health authorities? Well, currently, in the U.S., 2/3 of adults are either overweight or obese, and nearly 10% have type 2 diabetes, a tragic epidemic. And the rates of these conditions and others have soared during this low-fat era. Processed foods and low-fat. Now, the ideas I've been sharing are based on a large and growing body of evidence, and they're spreading among scientists and physicians around the world. You've heard of probably some diets based on these ideas, things like evolutionary or ancestral, paleo, primal, natural. But all of them share a core concept, that we eat unprocessed plants and animals. Now this leads us to, some would say, a radical idea. Some would even call it a fad, that we should eat a diet like our hunter-gatherer ancestors did for literally thousands of generations, a diet based on real food. Now, food manufacturers are not going to stop producing foods that intentionally manipulate us, overstimulate us, and trap us. But we are not like jewel beetles. We're conscious beings who can decide, I'm not going to eat that if I understand that it's bad for me. But I can eat all I want of real food, vegetables, meat, salads, fruit. And we don't have to go hungry, because it's amazing how well the body can work if you just give it a chance. And the beauty of this approach is you don't have to buy anything, you don't have to pay anyone anything, and you don't have to be deprived. Physicians and other health practitioners around the world are now applying these ideas to help people with a variety of health conditions, and they're having fantastic results. So I want to leave you with a question. What do you have to lose by eating a diet of real food and seeing if it can make a difference in your life? And you won't be trapped like a jewel beetle or a hummingbird or a baby sea turtle. Thank you.